Up next, we have an exciting panel discussion. We're going to be talking about, the title of the discussion is Women at the Top, Executives at Unicorn Companies and How They Do It. How many of you are familiar with the TechCrunch post that Aileen Lee wrote about unicorn companies? Raise your hands. Okay, awesome. So these are extremely scalable billion-dollar companies that she's referring to when she says unicorn companies, and they are called that because there's very few of them. But when they make it big. So, a little bit more about this session. We're going to be talking about how behind every founder there's really a lot of strong leaders that help scale and grow something from an idea to a business. So we're going to meet some Silicon Valley executives from some of the most well-known companies as they share their stories from start of the growth of the company and the companies that they worked at. So moderating this discussion is who I mentioned, Aileen Lee. She is the co-founder of her own venture capital firm called Cowboy Ventures. Aileen has been a partner with Kleiner Perkins since 1999, and she's led or supported as a partner in the backing of a number of companies, including Bloom Energy, Blue Nile, Callaway Digital Arts, Good Technology, One Kings Lane, Plum District, Rent the Runway, Showcake, Tell Me, and Tridenol, which I probably mispronounced. Before that, she was actually the CEO, so she's been on the operating side of a company called RMG Networks, which was leading out-of-home digital media, which was also backed by Kleiner. She's also previously worked at The Gap. No, probably not selling clothes, probably in the executive office. Also North Face, which I love, Odwalla, which I'm sure you all drink, and Morgan Stanley. So she has degrees from MIT and Stanford, which is extremely impressive, and I just wore myself out reading out all her credentials. But what I'm really excited about is Aileen has come to really support Women 2.0 in the last 2 years behind the scenes. We've had her now at 3 conferences back-to-back, including Vegas, which we were in a couple months ago. Honestly, she's just brilliant, smart, and sharp, and she keeps me on my toes. Sometimes I'm really scared to call her, because I'm like, she's going to tear me apart in a good way. Because she's awesome. So it's a pleasure and honor to have her back onto our stage. I'd like to bring to the stage Aileen, as well as her panelists, Kim, Bill, Allison, and, oh my God, my page is on. April, sorry. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm Aileen. I'm super thrilled to be back here at Women 2.0. Thank you for having me, and especially to bring these folks up onto stage who are some of my favorite people in the world, and also some of the most accomplished people in Silicon Valley. So I think this is going to be a blast. This is the executives at the top, AKA the ugly truth panel, AKA the really exciting opportunities ahead panel. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and you guys can correct me. This is like the cliff notes of your background. This is Bill Beer to my left, who I think just is probably one of the best recruiters in the universe, who I met and worked with a ton at Kleiner Perkins on pretty much any executive search where we were looking for a board member or a CEO or a CXO. Bill was always is always my first call, and we worked together a lot. I try to monopolize as much of his time as possible. And he's been at Daversa Partners for almost over a decade, and has worked with Uber, Pinterest, Snapchat, Airbnb, Square, One Kings Lane, basically a hot unicorn company in Silicon Valley. Bill is doing the searches for them. Did I get that right? That's right. Okay. I'm going to jump to April, actually, at the end, who is at Twitter. And April has a degree from UT Austin and an MBA from Haas. And she also has worked at basically like the all-star cast of Silicon Valley and tech companies. She started out at 3M. She worked at Deloitte, Intel, Travelocity, Apple, Google, Climate Corporation, and now Twitter. So April is 85. She just doesn't look it.
No, I just started when I was 9. It's a joke.
Allison Johnson, to her right, is the founder and CEO of West, which is a fantastic marketing boutique agency whose clients include Twitter, Square, Tumblr, Jawbone, RDO. In terms of the big company clients, she also works with a bunch of startups, and so she can work kind of high and low in terms of size. Prior to that, she was at Apple for 6 years as the VP of marketing, working with Steve Jobs, which I think is obviously basically until, what, 2012? 2006 to 2012. So just imagine iPhone, App Store, iPad, Apple TV. Allison was the head of marketing for all of it, which is just, yeah.
And I live to talk about it.
I know, seriously. Being the head of marketing under Steve Jobs is like...
We can have that conversation.
Yeah, easy, easy. He doesn't care about details at all. And before that, she was at HP, where she ran marketing under Carly Fiorina for 6 years. Yeah. And prior to that, at Netscape, and prior to that, at IBM.
That's
so
right.
Basically 4 unicorn companies.
And, yeah, another person who started at 9.
Yeah, exactly. And then Kim Jabal, who is next to Allison and Bill, has an engineering degree from University of Illinois and went to HBS. Worked at Anderson, Goldman, Google for 8 years, then Lytro and Path. So, and she recently joined the board of Federal Express. So I think basically among these 4 panelists, we have direct work experience at least 9 kind of unicorn billion-dollar companies, and then additional work with clients and partners, probably at least almost a third of the kind of mega hit companies.
20 of the 40.
20 of the, exactly, so basically half of the most successful, highest growth companies in tech around the country. So it's a pretty amazing experience. Did I miss anything? Okay, so I'm gonna reserve Bill for a couple minutes and have you guys talk a little bit just about your path to where you are. I mean, the 3 of you are probably among, if not, like, you know, this rarefied air of very senior women in Silicon Valley tech companies, of which there are unfortunately not as many as we would like to see. And so maybe, Kim, we can start with you. Just tell us a little bit about your path of how you came to be the CFO of Path. Is this the plan you had for yourself? And has it been like a straight shot?
So it's definitely not been a straight shot, which I used to worry about, but now I think it's actually been really good for me. But basically, I started I went to engineering school. I started as a, then we were called programmers. Now I say I used to be a software engineer. But we were building systems, and it was great experience, just like solid technical analytical experience, and decided that I wanted to go more towards the business side of the house. So I went to business school and kind of fell in love with finance because it also felt kind of geeky and analytical. And I went out of business school into investment banking. So that was a pretty big shift from being a very technical engineering type person. And I guess I think I've learned about myself that I just really like learning new things. And so it has definitely not been a straight shot. And I think there were probably some times when I thought, I could have gotten to the top a lot faster if I hadn't changed. But in a way, I think it's been really great for me because I think I've just really enjoyed. And I find actually, so my current role, I'm responsible for finance, HR, and legal, and especially on the finance and HR side, I do find always that system stuff comes in handy, because when we're deploying, new accounting systems or new HR systems, new recruiting systems, it actually does really come in handy. So it's been kind of a windy road for me.
When you were in college, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
I'm not sure. I don't think, honestly, I don't think I had a grand plan. And I think there was a part of me, I was from the Midwest, and I will confess, I think maybe I thought I might end up married with kids, which I did that too. But yeah, it's one of the things that I find really intriguing, like with a lot of the women's issues, is I do think sometimes we don't reach high enough, and we don't maybe have the right mentors. And that's
Were you always thinking, like, I'm going to always be a working woman? It's really important to me to be at the top?
Not necessarily, no.
Really?
I didn't have, growing up in the Midwest, like, all the moms were moms. Like, they didn't work. Like, it wasn't really something but I liked science, I liked math, and it just seemed like the right thing to do. So here I am.
Awesome. Okay, we'll get back to more questions on that. Allison.
Okay, so started out in communications and early on was a public affairs assistant in Washington, D.C., went and sat in congressional hearings taking notes for $13,000 big dollars a year. That's what, seriously.
Wow.
And really loved storytelling. And kind of my career has been built on that. But in the context of where I would actually apply my skills was into those parts of the company or into the parts of the business that everybody thought was kind of, boring or dull or not terribly interesting or a little, not the center of gravity. And then it was my job to figure out how to make it the center of gravity. So I would, kind of this person who was sort of a little bit of a rebel without a cause. And then I would go into these areas and help to make them interesting. I'm again, this is when I was 9 years old. You might not remember, probably most of the people in the room do not remember this, but OS2 versus Windows. Operating systems, like super gorpy, boring stuff. And we made it interesting. The OS2 Warp versus Windows battle, and so it was trying to find those kinds of opportunities to really, kind of do something interesting. And then, landed on the left-hand side of Steve Jobs for 6 years. So that was also a big educational opportunity. But I can say that I knew I wasn't going to be I knew I was super interested in business, super interested in sort of making my way up that ladder. Not terribly deliberate about it, but I highly recommend this. A stay-at-home dad, husband, that was incredibly helpful. But I knew it was my sort of destiny and my journey to actually be the one who kind of kept at it.
When you got married, was that something you guys discussed?
No. It was not something we discussed, but I knew it in my gut.
Really?
Yeah, I did.
You had a secret plan.
I had a secret plan. Yeah.
And how long have you guys been working it that way?
So about 10 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Your husband's great.
Yeah.
Great partner.
Hi guys, I'm April. So let's see my story. I went to college thinking I'd do chemical engineering, and then I realized that I'd probably work in an oil refinery, and I changed my major after the first semester. So around that time, I actually started doing tech support for for a company that did tech support for internet service providers in Austin. And I actually credit that with the whole reason I got into tech, because I did it because it paid $10 an hour. That was exactly why I did it. It seemed like a lot of money at that time as a freshman in college. And I actually found that I really enjoyed the technology side. It came easily to me. I started figuring out ways to not be on the phone with customers and to create web pages that would be support documentation to help provide other people on the team some guidance as to how to solve certain problems for customers on the phone. And I even was running around learning how to crimp cable just so I could do anything other than actually be on the phone. But I realized that I actually really enjoyed a lot of aspects of it, and kind of fell into some, found some kindred spirits in these other folks that enjoyed technology. And this was in 1998 in Austin, and so started looking towards San Francisco and everything that was happening here in the first .com bubble, and getting a little bit of the itch to be a part of it. So I changed my major to it was actually a business degree, but it was information systems, and I really enjoyed the coding classes, and it came really, to be honest, it came fairly easily for me, because when you are writing code, you know if you've gotten the answer right to some extent, and that is not necessarily the case in a lot of other areas of academics. So I really enjoyed it, and I actually had to really push to get to be an engineer in my first job out of school, because I didn't have a CS degree. I definitely felt confident that I could code, but I really pushed for it, which was interesting, because everyone else thought that maybe I should try being a product manager or should try going into marketing, and I was like, no, I really think I want to do this to start my career off. So I started from there, but I worked at Intel, and then at Travelocity. What I found was in my first week, I was a software engineer working on our partner platform, and I was immediately thrown into every conversation we had with Yahoo. And that was how I started to actually find that one of the things that I could bring, either just because of my background or maybe because of my gender, was that I could be sort of a conduit between the technology side of the house and the partnership side of the house, and that's been a consistent theme throughout my career. So since then, I've gone on to a lot of other companies, as we've already talked about. Maybe one of the things that I've done is I've recognized when sort of I felt like it was time to make that leap, and I've made some pretty tough choices along the way about leaving really great companies like Google after being there for a fairly short amount of time to take the next leap. But when I look backwards, it all makes sense. So I don't think it was a straight path looking forward, but when I look backward, it absolutely one thing connected to the next. And so at Twitter now, I've had a few different roles. I currently run product and product marketing teams working on our ad products, and get to run teams of really, really smart, hardworking people. And I really like to learn new functions. So product marketing is something also that I'm getting a lot more deeply into right now. And I really enjoy kind of collecting those functions, because I feel like it makes me more well-rounded and allows me to sit at the intersection of a lot of different conversations and decisions.
Yeah. Before I have another question, but Will you raise your hand if you are a founder of a startup? Okay, that's a lot. And then raise your hand if you are working your way up a technology company, but you're not the founder. Okay. All right, so that gives us a little context in terms of maybe the audience. So talk a little bit about choices you made along the way, places where maybe you could have fallen off, kind of off the radar or kind of off the trajectory that you were on. What are things that you think you did right? What are some of the lessons that you learned along the way? Like if you had to give advice to your 20-something self, what are things that you would say about lessons you've learned?
I can start, sure. I mean, you mentioned Climate Corp, which is funny. You have a good eye, because I actually oftentimes don't mention it because I feel like I was only there 5 months, and it's an awesome company. They've gone in to do really great things. I was sitting there one day, and a friend of mine had just joined Twitter, which was a product I really loved, and he IM'd me and said, "You have to come join Twitter." And I was like, well, I've only been here 5 months, and I actually just got back from 2 weeks on my honeymoon, my wedding and my honeymoon, and I really don't think now is the right time to make the leap. But I did a little bit of soul searching there, and now I look back, and if I had done what I thought was the right thing, if I'd been overly loyal and kind of stuck to that feeling of guilt that I still owed this company something because it just started, then obviously my career would be completely different. So I think I made the right choice there, but it was a hard one. Just like leaving Google after a short 2 years was a hard one and didn't seem rational. And your family asks, "You're changing jobs again?" Or "Isn't Google? It says Google's the best company to work for on the planet. Why would you leave there?" But when you get to that role that really allows you to shine and gives you a lot of autonomy, gives you a lot of opportunity for growth, and where you make a big mark on a company, at that point, you look back and it absolutely makes sense, even though in the moment it felt very scary and sometimes a little rash.
I would say, there were a few sort of critical points and sort of decisions, but I mean, obviously the one that I think is the biggest one is the kid one, it's the baby one, and how do you wrestle with that decision? As I said, I sort of knew in my gut that I was going to be the person who works and works and works. Just because I was that driven. That was the thing that really motivated me. And there's guilt associated with that. It's like, I wasn't the mom who was always at the kids' soccer team things. I didn't hang out with the moms at the PTA stuff. I was pretty absent from that stuff. Deeply devoted to the kids, but there were trade-offs that had to get made, and those were the trade-offs I made. I decided that I was going to be a working mom, and at points in time there was guilt associated with that, and I wondered if I was making the right decision. But I'm pretty comfortable after having raised them. They're now in college. They're doing great.
And they still talk to you.
More now. It's just something to look forward to. But yeah, it was a tough decision, but it was one that I felt really comfortable with, and I sometimes questioned, but most of the time felt like it was the right decision.
Sorry, were there times at Apple, I'm sure that there were a lot of trying times when you were under a lot of pressure, when you said to yourself, like, F this, like, I don't need this kind of pressure, or things like that along the way?
As the breadwinner, it gets really hard to make those kinds of F this sort of decisions. So in the spirit of total transparency, that was a really hard decision. I mean, when you have that responsibility for the family and the extended family, it makes that harder.
Gotcha. Kim?
Yeah, so I think in contrast, I was a little more uncertain. I think when I had kids, I look back and I feel like it all worked out fabulously. I feel really fortunate because I was working at Google at the time, and I was able to, I think I did a little bit of the leave before you leave thing. Like, I didn't go for the big promotions. I didn't go for that opportunity where I could have left to go to a really cool early stage startup.
I think I tried like 2 different times to pull you out.
Exactly. No, and I regret that a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm so thrilled that I didn't. I could have dropped. I think there is a real possibility that I might have said, I'm going to be that stay-at-home Midwestern mom. Unlike you, where I think you felt really sure. I think I was a little more unsure. Now I feel so happy that I stuck in there. But yeah, when I look back, I do wish a little bit that maybe I hadn't been so worried about balancing it all. And maybe I should have outsourced a few more things. And maybe I shouldn't have been trying to get to the kids Valentine's Day party that I missed this morning. You know, like, I think I'm a little bit more over it now, whereas I think back then I put a lot of stress on myself to be super mom and to stay in the game.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk shift it a little bit. Bill, you've had the chance to work on, you're pulling out your data?
I was.
You should. Your firm works on all venture-backed searches, basically.
Yep.
And I think something that frustrates me is that, you know, as an investor looking at a lot of startups, I don't see as many female founders as I would like. And also when we do searches, I don't see as many female candidates as I was like. You guys are pretty much the most, like in your organizations, are the most or only women at your level. Is that fair? Like, what is the state of the situation of women in tech at the high, like, kind of director, vice president, CEO level?
So the purview I have is founders, investors, CEOs, senior executives, reports into CEOs. That's the world that we play in. And just some of the data I pulled over the last couple of days, looking at the last 2 years worth of work that we've done, it was a sample of about 330 searches for venture-backed companies. So it's a pretty big pool, and primarily between here and the Northeast, New York, Boston, things like that. Of the 330 searches that we completed, only 16% had female executives in those roles. There's 2 areas where there's equality, if not women in the majority, and it's marketing. 48% of our marketing searches were female candidates. 65% of the HR searches we did had female candidates. There was not any other function on the executive team. The only function we don't touch is general counsel. And there was not any other function in the executive teams over that 330 searches that had over 20% of the selected candidates being women, which is pretty surprising. And then one thing that was really surprising is that only 4 out of 51 product or technology executive searches, CTO, VP of engineering, chief product officer, only 4 of 51 were women. 8% of those executives were women. And then I think one last thing, and the candidate pools. So those are the people who get the jobs. The pools are pretty similar in number. You know, I would say less than 15 to 20% of the candidates that we are evaluating, researching, interviewing for jobs are women. And I can genuinely say that on the Daversa side, and I do believe on the CEOs that are making these hires, the boards of directors that may be involved, I've never experienced gender bias. If anything, there's an encouragement to find female candidates, like you've said. So it's not a matter of lack of trying. This is just what the data looks like. And then the last part that I thought was interesting is of the approximately 300 companies we worked with in the last 2 years, less than 6% had female founders or CEOs. And that number is even smaller when you think about the venture investors and board members that were women in those companies, and that is our exposure. So,
what do you think is the number of female investors?
Well, I was anecdotally telling you earlier that I polled my entire firm. There are 60 people. We've worked with a lot of companies, and just an anecdotal. There was no science to this research, but we went around and we could only name 4 or 5 female investors or board members that were involved in the decision-making process.
For 300 searches.
Over 300 searches in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's maybe it's 8, I don't know. I mean, there's probably something we lost along the way, but it's pretty staggering.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, what encouragement can you give this group of women founders and tech executives or aspiring executives about what we can do to change the ratio? And like either for you in your own career, what we can do to help you get there, or what we can do to help you encourage others that you work with to get there. Go for it, any of you.
I'll start for sure. I think there's 2 paths to get to where these 3 very accomplished female executives have gotten. Well, first of all, I think April, Allison, and Kim all demonstrated that they got to senior executive roles at top companies by working for larger companies first. So the executive searches that we do are not recruiting founders and entrepreneurs to go help scale other people's small companies. So if you the path to the executive, it's a little bit backwards because you have to, I'm not involved in the development of talent coming out of college and mid-stage of career, but the executives we recruit to go help scale high potential companies come from larger companies, right? You go backwards to help somebody go forwards. So one path is, and Google, and we see it with Facebook today. I actually think Twitter is doing a pretty good job of, at the director level and above, with female executives, and eBay has done really well, not just the obvious, having had female CEOs, but tons of really good female executives. So those big companies need to continue to develop female talent, and that is a path to getting to the executive levels.
Yeah.
On the flip side, the easy answer, and this has probably been talked about 100 times over the last couple of days, is we need more female engineers. I mean, both April and Kim, neither of whom are engineers today, started out in engineering, and there is a degree in Silicon Valley, more so than in New York, credibility starts with having technical chops. And especially as a founder, most of the founders are engineer or product oriented. So if you want to found a company, unless it's maybe a One King's Lane where you have a domain specialty where merchandising is applicable, they're product and engineering executives. We don't have enough women in those roles. I don't know exactly how to change that, but that's the obvious starting point.
Yeah, one thought for me, one of the things I thought Google does quite well is just in terms of how structured hiring is. Like you sort of know when you're going into the interview, like what you're looking for and how that compares to how other people on the panel are going to be evaluating the candidate. And I believe that they look for some sort of diversity on the actual interview panel. I also know from working at earlier stage startups, like you're not at the stage where you're thinking about that. You're not, and so it takes some time for you to get some practice in terms of how you actually interview people. And I think that when you don't have that practice in place and you don't intentionally have some diversity on the interview panel, when you don't have clarity about what attributes you're looking for in the candidate, I think it's very easy for people to fall back to pattern matching and to look for candidates that do something similar, and oftentimes the other employees that do that role or that they've seen in other companies doing that role are men. And so I think that some amount of just being really intentional about that, and I don't think that has to come specifically from the recruiting organization within your company, but I do think that especially if you are an entrepreneur and you're thinking about how you're going to hire people into roles, I think that that's an area that just as someone that hires a lot, spends a lot of time focused on hiring. I think you have to be really intentional about what you're looking for and make sure that there's clarity across the people that will be evaluating the candidate. Or I think that unfortunately we end up coming up short if you leave things to a bit more of a haphazard approach.
Ready? Okay. I would say my advice, couple things. I think women have so many incredible qualities in the context of leadership, in context of communication and collaboration. Use those skills. But also, the thing that I think is really important, and this is, maybe the school of hard knocks was coming up through corporate America, which is pretty, old school, was to be fearless. Really stare them down. Have the courage of your convictions. Do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. But I think I earned respect at various points in time for being fearless and be willing to bet my job in ways that I will say to this crowd, my male counterparts were not. And so, my recommendation is courage of your convictions, stare them down, and fight hard.
Yeah.
She's amazing. I love Allison.
Amazing.
I guess I'd say two things. One, and I have a recent example of this. One is just kind of really doing stuff like this and exposing yourself to opportunities. I would say that I had some amazing male mentors in my career, and that's great. But something, I don't know why, about the female mentors, I guess I could just somehow see myself more in that role when my mentors were female. And I had this great example recently. I was at a conference, it was like a banking Goldman Sachs conference, and it was all entrepreneurs, like a lot of you are in the room. And I will say I'm at a startup, but I'm the CFO, I'm kind of the number two. And I always kind of saw myself as the number two. Like I was at business school and they asked who wants to be CEO and I didn't raise my hand. I was like, no, I think I really want to be the number two guy behind the scenes. And I was at that conference with all those tech entrepreneurs, and I was like, you go, girls. Like, I was so impressed and inspired, and I think for the first time in my life, I was like, I want to start a company. So I think, like, that was, like, for me, like, having that exposure to, like, the possibilities and being able to see yourself in those roles was, like, really big for me. And then the other thing, I think on the flip side, I think the workplace, I think we are actually pretty spoiled and privileged here in like the Bay Area. I mean, I do think there's progress that needs to be made in the workplace. I mean, at Path, I was really proud that our CEO really supported equal maternity and paternity leaves, which not all companies even around here have, but you can be darn sure, like in a lot of parts of the world or the country, or maybe in the country, the women get 4 months, the men get 2 weeks. I mean, that makes no sense. Like that's not a level playing field. Like we're all parents, and if we want it to have if we want women at the top, then we need men that are willing to stay home. We need men that are at least willing to do 50-50.
Yep.
And I think that's really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. Allison, you are now also a founder, right? After having worked at large companies for a long time, and you've got a lot of founders out there. Like, what would you say? Words of encouragement or lessons that you've learned so far founding a startup firm?
Terrifying and thrilling at the same time. I mean, absolutely terrifying and absolutely thrilling. The piece of advice that I read was actually a Ben Horowitz blog post. And he said at one point, he asks all of the CEOs that he talks to, sort of, what was your secret to success, the most successful ones? And what was the big strategy breakthrough? And they basically said, the thing that I did was I kept going. And that's my advice. Keep going, because it's hard as hell to get up every day sometimes, because it's scary. But that was it. Keep going.
That's awesome. I think we are going to open it up to Q&A. But maybe before we do, first of all, I just want to thank you guys again for sharing your Valentine's Day with us. Happy Valentine's Day. And any last words that I didn't ask you about, or anything that you want to get out to the audience before we move to Q&A? No? Good? All right, maybe if you think about it, let us know. Okay, so I think we'll open up for questions. And actually, help me thank the panelists so much for being as awesome as they are. Any questions out there? Yes.
I had a question on the numbers. Were those firms of a certain size according to either funding or employees? And if you look at maybe a smaller level, is there a shift?
I think so those are 98% private companies. We work with a few select tech public companies.
Grab the mic. Oh, sorry.
So 98% of those are private companies. That could be a 15-person startup that has an A round and is just trying to find their way, or a number of companies that we work with that went public not long after we might have done search work for them. And I think that sample size is pretty representative. I think where you might find some data trends would be consumer-oriented companies. The data is a little bit more favorable for female candidates than enterprise technology. You start to see a bit more balancing out there. The areas in the product and engineering numbers that data is the data. But consumer, I think, is probably 20% heavier in female candidates than the enterprise side would be. But the data is pretty consistent. It's amazing, actually, if you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know if you guys are planning on writing anything about that. I think we could have probably had a little bit more wow. But I think maybe being in tech for so long, it didn't shock me to hear those numbers, and it makes me want to fight harder to change it. I think if we had a goal of getting it to a third in the next few years, that would be really awesome progress. And that means in whatever situation that you're in, if you're working with investors, say, why don't you have any female partners at your firm? Or if you're working in a tech company, say, why don't we have any female candidates applying for this job? Or why are we not paying attention to these things? Why do we create let's change the environment, let's change things, and let's address it. Let's not pretend that it's all great. Let's actually talk about it and do something about it.
One thing that I also think is worth noting at the small companies is very rarely is any thought put into anything except that one thing you're trying to solve for in that exact moment. It's a very real-time business. There's no 5-year planning. You don't go to a startup, and when I say startup, I mean I'm not talking Uber or Airbnb that are likely public companies someday. And even those companies often lack organizational development, which also means talent development and career growth and a career track, where the opposite of GE, where every 2 or 3 years you're getting cycled into a new experience. So you don't get that development at a small company. So you don't go to a startup to develop a career. You go to develop like incredible powers of thinking and experiences. The career is developed by balancing both sides of it, startups with scale and with real operational structure. And that's the other thing about the startup companies. They think about the here and now. They're solving a certain problem. They don't look, in my experience, at sexual orientation, at male, female, at skin color. It is so agnostic to everything except whatever it is you're trying to solve for, which leads to a lack of planning or organizational development. Then you wake up one day and realize that your entire executive team is men, your entire board is men, every engineer you have is male, and you realize, wow, that might not be so good for culture or for the future of our company. And then we get asked, go find a female C-blank-O because that's the job that is currently open, and go see if you can find us a woman. That is the actual process that we often see. So not super productive and super organized in its thought.
That's very thoughtful. Other questions? Yes, over there.
We have some questions back here too. I don't know if you can see.
No, okay, good. Yeah, that's good. Wave your hands.
We're ready whenever.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maura Cunningham with Rockland Street, Wall Street, and my question goes to, I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm going to share a little story with you. We have an entrepreneur center in Nashville, Tennessee. They were recognizing a young lady from Stanford, a Stanford graduate, who she had a farm-to-table initiative, and she's doing beautiful work. So afterwards, I introduced myself to her, told her what I do, which is a financial literacy program for high school girls. So she said to me, "Are you going on college campuses?" And I said, "No, why?" And she said, "Well, I was going in the direction of finance, but I saw a wall of frat boys, and I turned around. So if you're going to change this and have more women in finance or any of the STEM, it starts even before college. But if you could share your experience with not only going to the startups, but before the startups and going into the colleges and high schools."
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
I don't think we would disagree with you. I think it's probably
I think, yeah, I mean, it
everything.
starts, well, there was a really interesting, so I do harbor a little guilt about leaving the tech. Like, you know, I could have stayed on that track. I mean, I'm still in tech, but like not staying on the engineering track. And I read this great article, I think it was the New York Times, and it was saying that, you know, and I think I would consider myself in this area, like there just, for women, is still not enough encouragement to stay on that track. And I look back and I'm like, again, back to mentors, if I had had like somebody saying, you should really stay technical, why do you want to go to the business side? I think I might have. And you know, I think we do need for young girls. Like I know here at Stanford, there's this awesome computer programming camp, and you know now the trend is everybody's trying to get their girls in it. I think that's fabulous. I mean, at age 6, let's do it. Let's start young, and then even if like us, you can move to the business side, it's just hugely valuable, and I think it does help for women to progress in their careers.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is I think to the extent that we all are motivated to sort of change these numbers. We will not change these numbers in a room of only women, so thank goodness Bill's here. So it has to be a partnership, and I would say back to that, you know, whether it's the high school or the college experience, for me, I've always worked well with guys. I've always had a lot of guy friends, and I think that's actually really important. And so I don't think it's about like let's get more women in the room so that you can feel comfortable working with other women. I think that's great, and I think that's a wonderful side effect. But I also think that in the current environment, you will be most successful if you can figure out how to be really great at working with men. I mean, that's the rational thing to do. And if it comes easily to you, then I think that you see fewer barriers ahead of you. But I can understand how that contact would feel if they saw the wall of frat boys. I think it's understandable to want to run. So.
In the back.
Hi, thank you. So we've heard today some different mentions of domain expertise versus, it sounds like, April, your experience, you referred to yourself as being well-rounded. I'm curious kind of the advice that you give both as kind of someone who has spent time in different roles and is kind of looking for the next thing and kind of feeling like, you know, hitting that wall of really they're just looking for an expert in this one particular area, especially for startups that are, you know, just so careful of needing someone who really can kind of hit home the one piece that they need. And then also as a hiring manager, kind of looking at a pool of candidates and trying to see beyond kind of the immediate need in front of you.
I'm one of those people who adhere to the principle: play to your strengths, do what you love, be passionate about it. So I'm less. I think generalist is interesting, but it's more interesting if you're using your gifts and doing what you do really well. So.
And I would add, on the startup side, at larger companies where jobs have more scale, but they tend to be more siloed. You're doing one thing at a massive scale. Startups, the ability to think outside the box, oftentimes too long in one particular discipline, things change so quickly that if you're just running the same playbook, entrepreneurs will steer away from people who they think might be outdated thinkers. An interesting data study would be looking at the unicorn companies, and if somebody actually took the time to look at the executives, since that's my area of expertise, the executives on those teams, how many of them did a job immediately prior, had a career immediately prior that actually was marketing, CMO of a unicorn company. It doesn't always work out that way for the startups. I think ability to think freely and to create is more important. So if I was a hiring manager at a startup, I would try to find a way to hire aptitude and potential, which is an incredibly hard thing to determine. And if I was trying to get a job at a startup, I would try to be really great at one thing and have done 2 or 3 others to make people think that I am a broader thinker than just a certain type of marketer, engineer, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I think April's a great example of that. I mean, all of you guys are, of basically doing a job because she thought, I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, she thought it was really interesting and she would do a great job at it, but she impressed people as someone who gets stuff done. So then when something new opens up, they're like, oh, let's give it to April because she can get shit done. Oh, stuff done, sorry. Other questions?
Over here? Oh, yeah. Not that you can tell where the sound is coming from. I did a lot of advising for student leadership, and one of the biggest things that even Kim, you mentioned that some of the most empowering conversations were with women in high power roles, and being able to see a woman in that role was really what helped you to move forward and everything. So, but one of the hardest things is, as a student or a young person trying to move up the ladder, is getting anybody to mentor you from one of those high roles. So I was wondering, for you all, how you've seen your colleagues, or what do you do to encourage? I'm starting to move up. I'm co-founding a company now, and getting great access to incredible folks like you. How do I encourage folks like you to mentor and to offer advice or become advisors of starting companies? And what have been tactics that have worked best for those that you've mentored, where maybe you wouldn't have, but they did something that really stood out, and you said, "I want to mentor you. I want to help you." Some practical tips that we can share.
I think definitely for me, it's always worked best if you're working together. So it's harder when it's like kind of a cold call. Like, I know somebody that knows somebody and I'd love to have lunch with you. I mean, we're just all so crazy busy that I find it's just more efficient for me because I do think this is so important. You've heard my story. Like, I think it's so important. And so what I like to do is find women at work that, where I can really develop a real deeper relationship. And also just as an executive at the company, try to set the stage and do the right things and try to make us a company that is very, very favorable to women and that is talking about these things, right?
Yep.
I mean, proactively talking about these things. So that's...
I'll add something just from an investor perspective. Like, I think it's harder when you're a CEO or a founder because you're the top of the pyramid. So I think, it can be in your investors, right? I would say even if you're early stage and you're not planning on creating a board, create kind of a fake board. And that's an opportunity to work with people where you actually ask people to join your board or be on your advisory board where you give them equity. So there is a little bit of an exchange, and as a result, there's a commitment. That may be another way to get people to really engage with you on helping you build the business rather than just saying, will you be my mentor? Can we have lunch?
I would echo what Kim said. It's easiest when we do take responsibility for mentoring the women around us. And in my capacity now, I am mentoring a lot of founders, and they happen to be a lot of women, which is really exciting in that capacity, in the context of business. And so it's been a great experience.
Any other questions back there? Yeah. Oh, maybe the one in the back, and then one over here, and then I think we have to wrap up.
Where are we going to?
Hi, I am a co-founder of a company, website for kids, and I have found a lot of gender bias, and especially I think because my company is for kids, that somehow it's seen as lesser than. So while it was very interesting to hear you say that in the hiring, even though those numbers are so skewed towards men in terms of who gets the job, that you've never seen any gender bias. My initial answer to that was, well, number one, you're a man. And number two, I don't buy it. I think we hear tons and tons of stories.
That was a good catch. I was going to give you a little crap about that.
We hear tons and tons of stories of rampant misogynism in the startup community, of women being put down, of overt sexual things going on in small startup companies where there's this culture, this sort of frat boy jock culture. And it's great and it's wonderful to be in this room full of women, but it's not the reality of what's going on there in the startup community, or really in any of these, any companies. But I think in this particular community, the startup community really has a bad rap for misogynism and being misogyny and being anti-woman and not promoting women. It's nice to say there's no women engineers. Maybe it's because when they get there, they're treated like crap. So I'm just curious if, you're all sort of above that stage, but I'm just curious if any of you have a point of view on what is going on in that culture and why it's like that.
It's a really good question. This is that could be a whole panel unto itself. Look, I don't disagree with you in the sense that it's not, it is harder for women. I think it's harder for women to raise money. And like Bill said, most of the investors are men, right? And so you have to work harder. You have to be even more different. You have to be better, I think, to raise money in the environment or raise money from other places in a way, because, and I'm happy to talk offline about this, and I'm sure you guys are too, because it is harder, and sexism definitely exists. You guys want to add to it?
One thing I'd say, I'm going to keep digging here. Genuinely, it is not something I've experienced. Now, I am a man, and I am not being discriminated against for that reason in most often, maybe right now, but other than that. There's a shortage of executive candidates across this industry right now. So I cannot remember one time where, and I am privy to some pretty harsh conversations. People are incredibly judgmental. People are judgmental about what products you build. The conversations about what people, the lack of respect they have for certain things. Never once has that conversation for me, and I've been privy to some, probably illegal conversations, certainly offensive conversations, and people who I completely disagree with. Never once has that been, we won't hire that person because they are a woman. So that is a genuine statement. My firm is 60% women employees as well, and so we have a number of partners who are women, certainly more than any of the venture. Our data would be incredibly favorable stacked up against any part of this ecosystem. And I've never heard that. So we have women looking out for women, representing female candidates, and we've never had that exposure. I'm sure it exists. I think there's probably as much bias against building a product for kids versus building a hardware product versus a social product versus this, that. People are judgmental to the nth degree in this industry. My personal experience is it hadn't been gender-based. I obviously can't speak for anyone else in this room.
Good job, Bill.
I think that I'm sure we've all experienced it in some ways. One quick anecdote is that where I was doing tech support 15 years ago for internet service providers, I'd say 1 out of 20 calls would clarify that I was actually the tech support when they heard my voice, and some would even ask specifically to speak to a man. So I haven't experienced anything like that in a long time. I would just say that I'm cautiously optimistic, and it's going to change, and it has to change. And I believe that because at Twitter, for example, we have so many women leading some of the most important organizations in the company, and they kick butt. And like, there's no doubt in my mind that they're going to continue to do that at Twitter, and they're going to do, you know, additional, even bigger things on their own. So, and we're in this room with all of you guys, and many of you guys are starting companies. So I can't help but be optimistic, and I hope I'm not being naive, but I don't see how this momentum that we have and everyone continuing to progress forward and to help bring up you know, more junior women in the industry and hire them into roles that stretch them means that we are already in the midst of a lot of change. And so I don't feel sad or angry about it, because I actually feel like it's changing before our eyes. So
Good. Is that a good way to end? Okay, that's a good way to end on a positive note. Thank you guys again so much. Oh, do we have one? You want to do one more? Okay, let's do one more.
Oh, jeez.
Sorry.
Is this on? It's on. Okay. So this is a quick one. This is directed to Bill. No, I'm just curious. you source candidates for some of probably the hottest companies that a lot of people want to work for. Where do you find these candidates, and what are some of the maybe better areas that are growing that you've found some great women candidates, for example?
So for the companies like Ubers and Airbnbs and companies where they're trying to solve a scale problem, which is most often the case, it is Google, Facebook, Amazon, eBay. So that's where we're looking. But if it's a 20-person company, we're most likely looking for people from other startups. Aileen highlighted, and I've mentioned some of the well-known companies we work for. 80% of the companies we work for have little to no success, and that's just the nature of the beast. So there's constant movement from startup to startup. I don't know that there's one simple answer for that. I think if you want to work for Uber right now, you probably have achieved a great amount of success at Facebook at an executive level, at Facebook, Google, Amazon, eBay, et cetera. If you want to take a 30-person company that's just getting off the ground, I think developing a steady career and hopefully picking a reasonably successful startup company and developing your talent there is suitable. So there's no one answer. It really is depending on what track you want to get on. I will say that those exclusive jobs for our top private companies are incredibly hard to get. Any candidate who's got the credentials is being considered for those jobs because it is such an elite few, and that is the top 0.1% of the candidate pool. Those are the most sought after jobs in the market. So, you know, it's competitive, and I don't know if that answered your question. It's a hard one to answer in general because I think depending upon what you want to do, there's many paths that will put you in the radar. When we look, I guess, I'm sorry for running on here, but when we look at a search, we will look at competing companies. So if company is if it's One Kings Lane that's looking to hire somebody, we'll look at all the other fashion and maybe furnishings and any other commerce site. Maybe you go to Amazon and eBay or big marketplace companies. So we very specifically think about who else is in a relevant category and who are the executives at those companies. It's truly, blind to anything except who is doing a relevant job at a company that might make them qualified for this. And I think that's genuinely how the CEOs and the boards look at that as well. So we're not broad thinkers in terms of where you go find that talent. It's pretty straightforward.
Awesome. Thank you again. These four folks I just think are super inspirational and are really, I think, breaking barriers and leading the way in fantastic companies, products that we love. So please join me in thanking these four unicorns. Thank you, guys. So awesome.
Thank you.
You're a unicorn.